So the first surface variation process I want to talk about is using the alpha tiling and then the tracks brush inside of ZBrush. So here I just have my model, and as you can see I've came through and done a lot of cleanup on the entire surface. So established a lot of panel lines with some of the standard brushes, used a bunch of the alphas we kind of talked about creating and using in the previous videos, and just pretty much coming through and applying different forms and details across the entire surface. So now this model is pretty much cleaned up all the way around, and it's nice and sharp in all the areas. So now I can proceed on with adding some of these little subtle kind of surface variations to help bring in a little more realism on the actual sculpt. So the first thing I want to do before actually talking about the alpha tiling and tracks option is I want to just come in and make another quick tiling texture. So over here in the tool palette I have the wrap mode plane loaded in, and this is the plane that we created in the brush creation video when we actually generated that tiling weld alpha and then applied it across the surface of our model. So I have this just kind of saved out from that video. So as you can see, it has the 3 polygroups kind of set up, which is going to allow me to frame on this middle portion here, and then using the wrap mode option in the brush palette, able to come in and generate a tiling alpha texture. So I'm going to come over here first to Geometry tab over here with this guy loaded in, and just make sure SMT is off, and just divide this up to around 1,000,000, so something like that. And then now I'm going to come and change my document size to that kind of square format, so we can just generate a square alpha texture. So I'm going to come over here to Document, turn Pro off, change width to 1024 and height to 1024, and then click Resize. It's going to tell me that you cannot undo this operation, so that's okay. I'm just going to hit Yes. And now I have my canvas size scaled to that 1024. So now I'm going to hit Control N on my keyboard to kind of clear out that plane there. So I'm just going to draw that plane back in and then go back into edit mode. So now, as we talked about in the actual brush creation videos, we're actually going to use these 2 internal polygroups here to actually frame this middle section to our actual canvas size, which is going to allow us to make that nice tiling alpha using wrap mode. So I'm first going to have to hide this kind of pink polygroup here, so Control Shift and click once to isolate it, and Control Shift click again to make it invisible and bring back the other 2 polygroups. Next thing I want to do is just zoom out my actual canvas a little bit and make sure I have a little UI border around the top and the bottom. And then I want to come down here to frame and just click that, and that's going to frame this visible 2 polygroups to my actual canvas. So now these internal 2 polygroups are framed nicely to that 1024 by 1024 canvas size. So now I need to actually come back in and make that pink polygroup visible again. Now you're not going to be able to see this change take place because it's actually going to be hanging off the border of our canvas here. So just come over and hold Control and Shift and click off, and that pink polygroup is going to now be around the edges but out of your canvas. So if you want to just come over here and just scale it out, you can see that pink polygroup came back. So basically we just hid that pink polygroup and we're framing by the internal structure and then bringing that pink polygroup back. So when we create our alpha, the actual borders won't get destroyed, giving us kind of holes in our tiling functionality. So I'm going to come over here and just turn off polyframes. I'm going to make sure I have my standard brush selected and change my stroke to spray. Then we go to my brush menu up here and open the curve subpalette and change this wrap mode option to 2. Now with this wrap mode option set to 2 and spray active, I can come through and actually start painting on this, and you're going to notice that when I go to the actual edges, it's going to repeat to the other areas of the model. So now with this stroke loaded as spray and the standard brush selected, I'm going to come here and just select the Alpha 09 brush. Now with this brush selected, I can just come and start applying these details to the actual surface here, and you're going to notice it's going to spray out all these little circles, and it's going to give me that illusion of the actual loop portion of Velcro, so kind of that soft, kind of loopy type look. So this is a cool way in which you can generate, alphas inside of ZBrush without having to go to another program, and just using simple alphas that already exist inside of ZBrush and spray strokes like this, you can generate some really cool kind of tiling surfaces to apply to your models. So after we're happy with the kind of look of this actual Velcro type pattern here, we're just going to come to the Alpha menu, we're going to open up this transfer section here, and we're just going to click Grab Dock. And now we have a nice alpha texture that looks like Velcro loop. So now I need to just return my canvas back to the original kind of layout for it. So I'm going to come back to the document size here, turn on W size, and then click New Document. I'm just going to tell me that the document's changed, and if it wants me to save, I'm going to say no. And now ZBrush is going to resize that document based on your UI space. So I'm just going to come over now and just select the helmet and draw that back out on my canvas here, and then go into edit mode. And I want to create one more quick alpha before we actually start applying these surface details to our model. So for this process, I'm going to come up to the alpha tab here, and I'm actually going to come down to the create menu, and there's this button called create from noisemaker. So what this is going to do, it's going to use the noisemaker surface tool inside of ZBrush and create an alpha based out of that. So I'm going to come here and set my width and height to 1024 and 1024. And then I'm going to come and just click Create from Noisemaker. Now Noisemaker is going to open up, and you're going to get this little window here. Now I'm not going to go into a lot of kind of the functionality of this, so I'm actually going to be covering Noisemaker a little bit more in the actual next video. But for this purpose right here, just generating this quick alpha tiling texture fully inside of ZBrush, I'm just going to come here and turn this noise plug option on. And when you turn this on, you're going to get this actual window. And in here, you're going to have these kind of variety of options you can kind of choose through to generate different surface patterns. So you can see it has a whole bunch of procedural type patterns you can come through and apply and actually turn into alphas. Well, I want to make a quick carbon fiber one to kind of apply to the helmet. So I want to have some parts on my actual model that actually has a little bit of carbon fiber interlaid into it. So different surface details to put on the surface. So I'm going to locate the actual stripes option right here, and I'm going to come to this actual shape here, and I'm going to change this to triangle, which is going to give me something like this. Then I come over to this scale value here, and I'm going to basically cut this in half, so give it a 0.5 scale. And now it's going to update my alpha here, and I'm going to end up with something like this. So this is giving me that kind of weave pattern that you often see in carbon fiber. And then I'm just going to hit OK. So now with this kind of visible here on the screen here, I can just come down here and hit OK again, and then it's going to automatically create a tiling alpha for me from that noise. So I didn't have to go to another program, it was all done entirely inside of ZBrush, and instantly I have a tiling alpha based on these procedural noises. So now with this selected, I now have just quickly made a carbon fiber surface detail that can actually come through and apply to the model. So now let's start applying some of these guys to the surface here. So I'm just going to rotate around and kind of zoom in on this part of the model right here. So just this area right here near the actual neck of Paul's scan data. So I want to come through and make this little kind of panel here, carbon fiber, and then maybe this panel up here. But I want them to be kind of separate and have like a different kind of following between the two. So I don't want to take this carbon fiber and apply it across both, since wherever there would be a break or a seam line on the model, that carbon fiber would change its direction or change its pattern. So to do this, I'm going to first make sure I have my standard brush selected. I'm going to go to stroke and grab the drag rectangle brush. And I could go through and just start dragging this out like so. But as you notice, as I'm dragging this out, it's not really repeating, it's not following the actual surface very well, and there's no way I'm going to be able to line this up. So I can use the actual tiling properties in the alpha panel to actually control how much this alpha actually tiles, and then when I use this drag rectangle, it's going to give me a larger surface to drag that alpha across the model. So I'm going to come up to the alpha panel here, and I'm going to just open up this modify tab, and in here there's an option for H tiles and V tiles. So if I take this alpha I've selected here and just up this tiling to say, let's try 20 on the actual H and 20 on the actual V, it's now going to take that alpha that we just created with that noisemaker plugin and tile it 20 times vertically and 20 times horizontally. So now if I come over and drag this across the surface of my model here, you're going to see I'm going to get a much larger kind of repeating alpha to kind of fill that area. So right now the actual depth of this is a little bit too strong, so I'm going to come up here and just change this Z intensity down some, say something like 5, and then I'm also going to change this focal shift down to -100. This is going to allow me to kind of apply this alpha with a little bit kind of a flatter stroke as I stroke on the surface here. So if I come and just click and drag now, you're going to notice you can see that kind of carbon fiber detail come in. And that's looking pretty good. So the depth on it is pretty nice, and it's actually filling that entire panel space that I wanted to actually have it conform to. Now, as you'll notice, as I actually apply this, it's applying it everywhere. So it's applying it to that panel, but it's also applying it everywhere else. So how can I go through and kind of control where this effect is actually going to be applied? So the first thing you can do is come in and just start masking. So you could take, your mask brush and mask stuff around like this. You could load in the masking depth brushes that we created in the earlier videos. So if I isolate by the letter M and just find the actual masking convex brush, and now I could come in and just use that, and that's going to hug that border, as you can see there, and allow me to come through and quickly mask this panel out very quickly. And so once you have this area kind of masked out like so, I can now invert that mask by just holding Control and clicking off my model there, and then just making sure I have that drag rectangle on the standard brush selected. I can just click and drag that out now to get that carbon fiber established, and then clear my mask, and you're going to see it's holding right to that panel there. So that is one option to kind of come through and just mask areas out, and using that depth masking that we created in the last topic to kind of generate those little areas to apply the surface details. The other option you can do is actually using the morph target system. So if I want to apply another set of actual carbon fiber to this part here, but I want the carbon fiber to go this way instead of going that way, what you can do is you can come to your actual tool menu here and go to the morph target section and just store a morph target right there. Now with that same kind of standard drag rectangle and that brush alpha selected, I can come over here and just drag that out again to get that secondary patch of carbon fiber established. And now you notice that as I drew it out, it went everywhere again. So it's all over the place. I didn't have any masking set up. But now I can go to my morph brush by hitting B on my keyboard, isolating by the letter M, and then just locating morph. Now with the morph brush, I can come through and morph out any of that areas where the kind of carbon fiber went to that I don't want it to affect. So this kind of gives you a visual representation of the exact areas, and you can just quickly come through and start morphing these out and just isolate that section. So this is another option to kind of come through and apply a global kind of noise pattern to your model, and then go back through with just morph and scrub those areas out. So like this. So just coming through and just clicking the areas where that stuff for that secondary pass of that carbon fiber went and you didn't really want it to go. Now you can also use layers to kind of control your actual alphas as well. So if I come to the actual back section of the model here and then say mask, quickly mask this portion out, just give me a large brush size here, just mask this back area so I'm not affecting this top part up here, and just flipping that. And then just dragging that alpha across there, I'm going to get that kind of carbon fiber look. You may have to turn symmetry off, so something like that. Now, say I want to kind of control this, or say, later on I find that this is a little bit too light and I need it actually heavier. Well, you can actually store a layer and then apply the alpha on top of it, and then control how much intensity that alpha has through that actual layer. So if I undo that quick and then come up here to the actual layers palette here, and then just click New Layer, and this is going to generate a new layer for my model. So now I come through with this alpha and say I crank up the intensity to say something around 20. And just rotate here a little bit and apply that to the surface. So it's coming out really, really strong. So it's a very, very strong effect that's actually applied to that panel there. Well, now I can come over and just turn off this record mode. And now with this actual slider here, I can actually change the actual intensity of that layer. So as you can see here, I can take it and scroll it down, and it's going to, apply that alpha very lightly. Or if I want to really spike it up, I can go all the way to the top. If you want to further enhance that actual detail now too, you can actually duplicate the layer, and that's going to apply that kind of layer effect twice to your model. So if you just have this one layer here, you can come down and click duplicate layer, and now it's going to give you a second layer, which is going to multiply that kind of detail that you just applied to the model. So now I basically have that whole effect applied twice. And you can always come in and just turn these kind of layers off, and then also tweak the actual values of the intensity to kind of determine, how much of that kind of effect you want to actually be applied. These can also be typed in, so if you have a specific value you want to try to apply to it, you can just come over here and type this in manually, and you can see how it's giving you that kind of nice control and a little more functionality, so I don't have to come back and repaint that actual stroke every time. You can just come to the layer panel over here and just change that value to increase or decrease the intensity as needed. Now, what if we have a part of our model, like this section here, that has an extremely large change in the actual surface? So we have this kind of really straight area here, and then it falls to this kind of curve that goes to the back of the helmet. Well, what if we want to put carbon fiber all across here? But we want the carbon fiber to be consistent in size and intensity here, as well as up there. Well, if we use the actual drag rectangle and kind of click and drag on our model like so, you're going to notice that the actual intensity and scale kind of depreciates as it goes further away from your initial stroke. And this is because it's looking at the normal of the area in which you first clicked and dragged and applying the actual surface there, and then it's just kind of falling off towards the rest. Now, since this surface has this crazy kind of transition, you're going to notice the distortion happen. So you can see here the intensity is very soft compared to some of the areas up here where it's a lot stronger, and also you can see that as I'm hitting this type of edge towards that outskirt of that actual stroke, you can see it's actually losing a lot of that clarity, and that carbon fiber is getting larger. So how can we go through and solve this kind of issue and make sure we get a consistent stroke here as well as here on our model? Well, to do this, we can actually link one of these alphas we've created and actually link it to a tracks brush that is inside of Zbrush. So I'm just going to undo this here and just kind of move my model up. Now, the tracks brush is actually located inside a Lightbox, so you can come up here and just click this Lightbox button or press comma on your keyboard, and then you want to just navigate to the brush menu right here. Now, when you're in this kind of brush area of Lightbox, there is this folder here that's called tracks. We're just going to come over here and double click that. Now, inside here you have a few brushes, and the one brush we're looking at is actually this Tracks 3 brush. So I'm just come over here and select that and then just double click it. And as you'll see, it's going to load that Tracks brush right into Zbrush. Now, if I come over here and look at the actual alpha that's linked to the tracks brush here, you're going to notice that it's looking a little bit distorted. So there are a few settings we kind of need to reset. So we're going to open up our alpha panel here, and we're just going to come down here to this modify area. So we were using those tiles to kind of establish our tiling values while we were using the actual drag rectangle stroke. So we just need to reset both these guys back down to 1. And then the actual tracks brush comes in with some of its settings of its own right now. So it has a mid value, a radial fade, and then the actual alpha graph is adjusted as well. So we just need to go ahead and reset all these. So I'm going to change the mid value to 0, radial fade to 0, and then for the graph I'm going to come down here and just click reset. So now all this stuff should be kind of reset, and the brush is now ready to take one of the alphas that we've generated and apply it across the surface. So I'm going to come over here to the actual alpha and just click that, and I'm going to locate the actual Velcro alpha we created earlier, so this one right here. And I'm just going to position my model, and with this tracks brush you can change your focal length and then adjust the intensity some. I can come through and now drag this across the surface, and as I drag this across the surface you're going to notice it's going to repeat based on that actual alpha tiling. And this is going to allow me to come through and quickly kind of establish an even stroke across that entire area. So you can see the consistency is the same from this area here to this area there. Now as this transitions across, I can just continue this stroke down, and it's going to keep that same kind of density as I stroke across my model. So this is going to allow you to keep that kind of consistency that the drag rectangle wasn't giving us with our actual alphas. So this process here is great for using on like straps or other like really skinny elements that you may have on your model that are going across multiple surfaces or multiple angles. So drag rectangle will often not be able to get those surfaces, but just using this tracks brush and applying that actual alpha to it is going to give you that kind of uniform look in which you want. Now another thing this tracks brush is really good for is kind of establishing areas that may be masked out really quickly and not having to set tiling and things like that. So if I want to put just some Velcro right here on this back of the helmet, come and just grab my move transpose line and just drag a transpose line out, and basically the angle I want to kind of place this Velcro patch. And then I'm going to come over here and just click this white circle. So this is the same process we used when we were just talking with the transpose line. So clicking this white circle here is going to rotate my model on canvas space to a new orientation, which is going to allow me to draw some straight lines and things like that. So now it's oriented like this. If I go back to draw up here and then hold control, I can now use this square version of the mask and come through and get a really precise area masked out. And so this is going to be on that angle in which we established with the transpose line, so it's going to be perfectly square. So now I can rotate my model back around and flip my mask, and now I have this unmasked area on the surface here that's actually defined in that square pattern. So now with this tracks brush, I can just come and just start my stroke out of my mask and just stroke all the way through, and you're going to get that kind of Velcro pattern established. Now you may have to play with your intensity some, but this is a great way to come through and add some details like that on the surface of your model. So now I can actually come through and put some little infrared cat eyes on the actual helmet here, so you can be seen by any flying aircraft flying above. So that covers the basics for using some of these kind of drag rectangles and tiling alphas inside of ZBrush to generate a little more surface details on your model. So we're going to continue talking about surface details and continuing adding some of these little areas of change across the surface as we continue sculpting a helmet inside of ZBrush.